The airfield still belonged to the night when Mia Ortega rolled her old hatchback into the gravel lot. The Pacific wind carried salt and dampness, rattling the loose chain-link fence as if reminding her the ocean was never far. She shrugged into her faded flight jacket, the one her father had given her when she was 16, patches threadbare, zipper reluctant. A dented thermos clanked against her toolbox as she hauled it out of the trunk. The lid was stained with old coffee rings, permanent as ink, and inside her toolbox a dog-eared photo of her father leaned against the wrenches, a younger man in marine flight gear, arms slung around a helicopter's doorframe, smile lopsided and proud. She crossed the tarmac with the practiced economy of someone who had done this walk hundreds of times. Her boots made almost no sound over the concrete, and the floodlights threw her shadow long against the hangar wall. The maintenance shed door groaned open, greeting her with the familiar smell of hydraulic fluid and dust. She set her thermos down, the hiss of steam escaping as she twisted the cap and scanned the range. Another long day of checklists and quiet labor, she told herself, until the dark SUVs rolled onto the flight line. The Navy SEALs stepped out in practiced silence, every motion efficient, gear slung tight. They didn't need to speak much. The air around them carried discipline like a second skin. At their head walked Captain Daniel Hale, not the tallest or broadest, but compact in a way that radiated control. Men glanced toward him before they acted, as if his presence set the tempo. His gaze cut across the field like a searchlight, sweeping, calculating, never lingering more than a second. Mia stayed at the edge, broom in hand, pretending her job was to chase dust, but she watched. It was impossible not to. Years of wrenching on engines and checking rivet lines had trained her eyes to catch mistakes, and her eyes went almost immediately to the youngest in the group. Perez's nervous shoulders hunched high, jaw tight. His hands trembled as he worked the parachute rig, fumbling with pins, missing a clasp. He yanked one strap too tight, leaving the harness uneven. He sucked in a breath and held it until his neck cord stood out, then let it go in a sharp exhale. Not the rhythm of someone confident. Mia cataloged each error automatically, like entering data on a form she hadn't agreed to fill out. Her broom kept moving, but her mind was elsewhere, ticking boxes of fault and consequence. Skipped pin risk on deployment. Harness slack instability in jump. Breath control panic under stress. She said nothing. Civilians weren't supposed to correct elite warriors. She had learned that lesson her first month here. Stay invisible, keep the line clear, don't get noticed. The morning sun edged over the horizon, lighting the silver skin of the training aircraft. The SEALs gathered near its wing, a tight circle around Captain Hale. His voice carried low, steady, then sharpened as he looked over the group. "Any combat pilots here?" he asked. The words dropped heavy in the chill air. It wasn't a real question, it was a challenge, a probe for authority and readiness. The men glanced at one another. No one spoke. Perez shifted his weight, knuckles white around the harness. The silence stretched, humming with unspoken tension. Mia's fingers tightened on the broom handle. She felt the photograph in her toolbox as if it weighed against her ribs. Her father, helmet tucked under his arm, the smell of jet fuel clinging to his flight suit when he came home. He had raised her on checklists, on the discipline of systems, on the difference between courage and bravado. She was just a mechanic, just a 23-year-old keeping tuition afloat with grease-stained hands. She had no business here. But the words pressed at her throat anyway, and before she could stop herself, before her mind could slam the door on impulse, her mouth betrayed her. She stood. The men shifted around her, boots grinding against the concrete as if to underscore the weight of her mistake. Civilians didn't speak up like that. Not here. Not in front of men who made their living betting their lives on details. The semicircle of operators turned toward her, surprise etched in their faces, curiosity sharpening the edges. Perez bristled immediately, jaw tightening as he pulled the harness close to his chest like a shield. A couple of the older SEALs muttered under their breath, one raising an eyebrow as though waiting for Hale to cut her down. Captain Hale didn't move at first. His eyes narrowed, measuring her the way a mechanic measures a part, gauging tolerances, wondering if it will fit. When he spoke, his voice was flat, almost bored, but his words carried. You, a pilot? Mia's mouth was dry, but her voice didn't shake. No, sir. My father was. He started me on checklists when I was 12. I grew up around flight lines, maintenance hangars. He made sure I could run diagnostics before I could drive a car. She let the words hang, not a boast, just a fact spoken with the quiet authority of someone who knew the weight of what she said. The circle of men didn't laugh, but the disbelief was palpable. Perez smirked, the kind of expression meant to mask embarrassment. We're fine here. I've got it handled. His tone was sharper than his hands had been, brittle enough to snap. Hale ignored him. He lifted a hand, palm out, silencing the low ripple of chatter among his team. Then he pointed to the training helicopter gleaming in the sun, its fuselage painted in utilitarian grays and greens, rotors locked. All right, show us. Run your diagnostic. The broom in Mia's hand suddenly felt ridiculous. She leaned it against the hangar wall and walked forward, boots steady despite the knot twisting in her stomach. Up close, the helicopter was warm from the rising sun, metal skin gleaming with a faint sheen of oil. She laid her palm flat against the fuselage, feeling the vibration of the cooling engine like a fading heartbeat. She started with the obvious: straps, buckles, pins. The scent of hydraulic fluid mingled with the faint tang of jet fuel, familiar as breath. Her fingers traced along the harness Perez had rigged, tugging at a strap until it revealed its slackness. She reset the tension, the webbing rasping under her hands. A safety pin dangled where it should have been locked. She slid it into place with a metallic snap. Perez shifted uncomfortably. I was going to get that. Mia didn't look at him. You missed it, and you over-tightened here. She adjusted the chest strap, showing how a rider's breathing would seize under strain. Then she crouched low, eyes narrowing at the trim tab linkage on the tail. The detent pin hadn't seated correctly. With a push and a twist, it clicked into place. The sound echoed sharp and final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. She stood, brushing grit from her palms. That's 3 issues that could have compromised your jump. None of them catastrophic by themselves, but together, they build. Missions fail from small things stacking up. Hale's gaze stayed fixed on her, unreadable. Then he gave a small nod. Make the call, he said evenly. If you see something wrong, fix it or explain why we're grounded. Mia took a breath, steady and measured. She turned to Perez, her tone calm, not cruel. You're rushing, holding your breath when you should be pacing it. You're treating the checklist like a chore instead of a lifeline. You need to slow down, reset each step. Don't think of it as hardware, think of it as people's lives hanging on your hands. Perez's smirk faltered. He glanced at the tightened strap, the pinned detent, then back at her. His silence was louder than his earlier protest. The others shifted subtly, the mockery draining from their faces, replaced by something else: respect, reluctant but undeniable. They had watched her spot the faults, fix them without fuss, and teach as she went, not with arrogance but precision and care. Captain Hale folded his arms across his chest, his expression still measured but softer at the edges. He let the silence stretch before he asked, almost casually, "Ever considered instructing?" Mia blinked, the question hitting harder than any reprimand could have. The idea of standing in front of men like these, teaching them, felt both terrifying and intoxicating. She managed to shrug, her voice quiet but steady. Never thought anyone would ask. For the first time that morning, Hale's mouth curved into something close to a smile. Word traveled fast on the base. By noon the next day, people Mia had never spoken to were glancing her way, whispers trailing after her like exhaust. What had begun as a single moment of impulse standing up and proving a point was already being retold, exaggerated in small details, polished like a sea stone. She tried to lose herself in routine, tightening bolts on the line, restocking the hangar shelves, anything that felt normal. But when the black sedan pulled up, and Lieutenant Commander Avery stepped out, crisp in his uniform, Mia knew normal had slipped away. He wasn't a tall man, but authority carried with him like gravity. He didn't waste words. He asked her where she was from, what her background was, whether her father's name was Miguel Ortega, Marine pilot. The questions were gentle, but each one seemed to weigh more than the last. "Yes, sir," she said finally, tugging her jacket zipper higher, as if it might hide the heat rising in her face. Avery nodded once. "Your father flew a C model, didn't he? Huey's out of Camp Pendleton?" Her throat tightened. The memory came back clear. Sitting on the cracked vinyl seat beside her dad, her small hands gripping the straps, the smell of canvas and oil heavy in the air. He let her wear the oversized helmet once, the comms too big for her head, but the sound of his voice inside her ears, making her feel as if the whole sky belonged to them. She remembered the thump of rotors, her stomach flipping as the helicopter banked over a ridgeline. He had laughed, told her not to be afraid of the tilt, that balance was everything. Late nights came next in the flashback, the two of them hunched over battered maintenance manuals spread across the kitchen table. She'd trace diagrams with her finger, following fuel lines and electrical schematics, while he quizzed her gently. Most kids had bedtime stories. She had system checklists. By the time she was a teenager, she knew the smell of scorched wiring, the difference between a minor vibration and a dangerous one, better than most of her peers knew their algebra. Avery studied her face as if weighing the truth in those silent memories. He gave a single nod, then walked on, leaving her with the uncomfortable certainty that she had just been entered into some unspoken ledger. Later that evening, Captain Hale found her outside the hangar. The sun had dipped low, staining the horizon orange and violet. He leaned against the fuselage of the helicopter, arms crossed, watching her with that steady, unreadable gaze. "You know," he said, "we don't bring civilians into the loop, not our way, but I think you ought to sit in on something, just to see it." "Nah." Mia blinked. "Sir?" A mission planning session, followed by an integration drill. Air to ground. You observe, nothing more. No paperwork, no promises. His mouth twitched almost into a smile. Unofficial. The weight of it pressed on her chest. She thought of her tuition bill sitting on the counter, the medical copays she sent off each month for her father, the stack of textbooks on her desk waiting for exams. Nursing school had been the plan. It was steady, practical, a way to build a life. But this was the language she had been raised on, the rhythm of engines and the geometry of flight. She said yes. What followed in the weeks ahead was a quiet double life. Days were divided between lectures on physiology and hours hunched over notebooks, and then evenings in hangars where radios crackled with brevity codes she was just beginning to understand. She learned call signs the way other students learned poetry. She watched the choreography of operators moving around pilots, how silence could speak louder than an order. Sometimes she caught a slip in a call-out before anyone else, like the time a pilot skipped a step on his pre-flight. She had hesitated before correcting him, but when she did, he didn't bristle. He simply nodded, corrected it, and moved on. That small acknowledgement fueled her more than any grade she'd earned in class. The true test came during a simulated insertion run. Pilots were hunched over maps, seals, strapped gear, and rehearsed movements. In the air, an anomaly appeared: GPS drift, instruments wobbling as the training range's terrain confused the avionics. Calls overlapped on the radio, voices sharpening under pressure. Hale watched closely, waiting to see who would adapt. Mia's eyes lifted to the shoreline, the shimmer where late afternoon heat bent the air, and the odd sway of a magnetized beacon just off the training course. The pieces fit together like a pattern she had known all her life. She spoke before fear could stop her. "It's refraction off the waterline, sir. The beacon's reading dirty. Shift course 5 degrees west, resync on the secondary." Hale's head turned. For a moment she thought he might shut her down. Instead, he gave the order. The pilots adjusted, the course stabilized, and the run went off without another hitch. It wasn't flashy. No one cheered. But everyone in that cockpit knew the mission had been saved by a quiet observation no one else had made. Afterward, Hale pulled her aside. His voice was low, almost conversational. "You've got eyes most people don't. That's rare. I know a contractor who trains pilots and operators. They're always looking for people who can see what others miss." He studied her a moment longer. "I'll put your name forward." The words landed like a door swinging open on a room she hadn't realized existed. The choice was no longer hypothetical. 6 months changed everything. The girl who once swept hangar floors before sunrise now carried a contractor's badge clipped to her jacket, her name printed beneath the words, Civilian Liaison, Flight Integration. The hours were longer, the travel constant, but the paychecks were larger than she had ever imagined. Tuition notices that used to keep her awake at night were cleared a month early. The unopened bills from her father's doctor, the ones she used to shuffle to the bottom of the stack, had been paid in full with a single transfer. There were mornings when she caught herself staring at the absence of those envelopes, marveling at the quiet weight lifted from her chest. Her workdays took her from desert ranges where the heat shimmered off the tarmac to forest clearings where rotor blades chewed the mist into ribbons. She wrote lesson modules late at night in motel rooms, bridging the language gap between pilots and operators, explaining to one side why ground vectors mattered, and to the other why cockpit workload wasn't as simple as it looked. The modules weren't flashy, but word spread that they worked. She learned to sleep sitting up, to eat fast, to live from one duffel bag, and to speak both the clipped syllables of pilots and the shorthand of SEALs. Her first solo instructional session came on a frosty morning in Virginia. The group assembled in front of her was a mix of wary eyes, pilots with thousands of flight hours, operators who had jumped from more aircraft than she had ever ridden in. Their skepticism was unspoken but heavy in the air. She felt it pressing against her as she walked to the front of the hangar, lesson plan in hand, heart hammering. The first hour was rough. Questions came sharp, almost baiting, as if they were waiting for her to slip. She didn't try to outmatch them with bravado. Instead, she slowed her pace, showing rather than telling. She crouched beside a cockpit, pointing to an overlooked switch sequence, and explained how the operator's gear weight changed trim expectations. She lifted a harness buckle and asked an operator to breathe with it set his way, then adjusted it and showed him the difference. The tension eased. The men began leaning forward instead of crossing their arms. By mid-afternoon, they were asking her to walk through scenarios again, their resistance replaced with attention. Her rhythm emerged patient, exacting, and always humble. She didn't posture as an authority. She acted as though she was still learning alongside them. That humility was what kept them listening. But in the quiet hours after class, doubt came. Nursing school had been about saving lives. Now she was sharpening the edge of warriors whose job meant ending them. One night, sitting at her father's kitchen table, she put the question to him. Am I helping people live or making it easier for others to die? Miguel Ortega studied her for a long moment. The lines in his face were deeper than before, but his eyes were steady. Tools are neutral, mija. A scalpel can save or it can kill. The mastery isn't the danger. Responsibility Island teach well. That's what you can control. His words steadied her more than she expected. Months later, she found herself back where it had started, at the coastal field, the morning air damp with salt. The same black SUVs rolled in, the same operators stepping out with quiet purpose. Captain Hale stood at their head, the familiar gravity in his stance, but his eyes softened when they met hers. He turned to his men and asked the same question he had on that first day. Any combat pilots here? The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't heavy with challenge, but expectant, almost rehearsed. This time, when Mia stood, no one doubted. No smirks, no whispers. Only space opening for her to step forward. She moved to the helicopter, fingers adjusting a flight instrument under the low wash of dawn. The metal was cold, the light soft, and her hands steady, no longer the hands of a girl replacing targets in the shadows, but of a teacher trusted to guide those who would carry machines into danger and back again. One small, brave choice had bent the line of her life, and now it ran true.